Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. It's an exciting, colorful, disturbing book of the Bible, full of stories of intrigue, assassination, power, greed, war, and death. It was a time when heroes were needed, and heroes were brought forth, at least at first. I'm talking about the book of Judges in the Bible, and we are going to look at several of the characters or judges in this book. You see, this is the week of July 4th, the day we celebrate our freedoms as a nation, and one of the minor themes of the book of Judges is freedom for the Hebrew people. So it seemed good to me that as we celebrate our freedoms and think about our own history, we could look at some stories of Israel being freed from oppression as well. Today I want to give you a brief introduction to Judges, and then we want to talk about a woman named Achsah, who wasn't a judge, but, well, more on that in a little bit. In some ways we are starting in the middle. Judges comes at a time in Israel's history when they were no longer being led by Moses and Joshua, and when the period of Judges ends, they are being led by a king. This book describes those in-between years, from Joshua to King Saul. Judges in the Bible didn't decide legal cases the way we do today. Rather, they were warrior rulers who led for brief periods of time or in military emergencies. Some of the judges are familiar names to you: Deborah, Gideon, Samson, and Samuel, the last of whom was the last judge and oversaw the transition to having a king. The book of Judges depicts the gradual decline and disintegration of Israel's society and faith. In fact, as you read the book, you tend to get more and more dejected as the stories go along. The early judges were faithful to God, but as you move along, the judges get worse and less faithful, until in the end, Samson acts as a judge, but never actually delivers the people. There's a pattern in the book of Judges that repeats over and over. Israel does evil, and God sends an enemy to oppress the people. God's purpose in this was to bring them back, to drive them back to God. And it works. Eventually, under oppression by a foreigner, Israel cries out to God for deliverance and freedom. God then raises up a judge or a deliverer to free them. Then, after a short while, Israel does evil, forgets about God, and the pattern repeats. The book opens with a quick and odd little story of a battle with the Canaanites, and when they capture the opposing king, they cut off his thumbs and his big toes. That seems odd to us, but it was a sign of disablement and humiliation. It was a common practice in that day, in fact. Cutting off the big toes meant the person couldn't be stable to fight you, and without thumbs he couldn't hold a sword to attack you. Those were different times. Which brings us to the person we want to talk about today, a woman named Achsah. Before we get to her story, you probably need to know that when Moses had died, his assistant Joshua led the people, and when Joshua's time was over, his assistant Caleb became the leader. The Israelites had won many battles, and finally Caleb needed to attack the people living in a place called Kiriath-Sepher. Caleb made an offer. Whoever attacks Kiriath-Sepher and takes it, I will give him my daughter as a wife. A man named Othniel, who was Caleb's nephew, accepted the challenge. Actually, later, Othniel becomes the first judge, and we will talk about him tomorrow. Othniel did attack and did take the city, and Caleb's daughter Achsah was given to him as his wife. That's one of the ways times were different. Marriages were arranged, and women really had no say in decisions like this or in other matters of what was deemed men's matters. Caleb also gave them a rather large parcel of land as a wedding gift, only the land was in the Negev. The Negev region is a pretty dry, sparse, and desolate place with lots of rock and sand and not much in the way of trees or grazing land. That's when Achsah steps out of the traditional role a woman had. She goes to her father, gets off her horse, and asks him for some more land that had water as well. And Caleb does grant her 2 more parcels, each with a spring on it. That brief little story in Judges 1 lifts up Achsah as the pioneer of the role of women in the book of Judges. There are a surprising number of women in Judges who take center stage, an oddity in the patriarchal world of the time. Some examples that come to mind later: Deborah, who was a judge, along with Jael, who has a story you should learn, and Samson's mother. In important ways, Achsah stands up for women's rights and equality, and she wins the day. This might have something to say even now. One other small point about Achsah. I've mentioned that as the book of Judges goes along, the judges get worse and worse and society disintegrates. One of the ways you can see that is with the prohibition on intermarrying with Canaanites. Such intermarriage was forbidden. Othniel and Achsah modeled appropriate marriage within the faith and faithfulness to God. However, as the book moves along, these rules are followed less and less, with different later judges ignoring them all the way until you get to Samson, who didn't seem interested in Israel's women at all and went after Delilah instead. By that time, even judges were ignoring the laws of God. So, as we celebrate our own freedom this week, we begin with a story that is a precursor to freedom and equality for women. Tomorrow, we will begin looking at some of the good judges who led Israel to freedom. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.